Hello, mathematicians. Here is the video for the cookie packet. Okay, this is a real recipe, so I suppose you could make it. I just didn't write down the temperature and how long it has to be in the oven and all of that. But these ingredients are correct. All right, so for shortbread cookies, let me write my name on it first. I took a few of the ingredients that were more than one whole, and I changed them to an improper fraction. And your job is to change it back to a mixed number, which is usually the way that it's shown in a recipe. Okay, so 3/2 is more than one. And I, on the first page, showed some pictures. So we have 1/2, 2/2, 3/2, which is the same thing as 1.5. So on this first page, this picture should really help. All right, let's take a look at 5/4 cups of powdered sugar. It's more than one whole. So we have 5/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4/4 would be one whole plus one more. So 5/4 is the same as 1 and 1/4. Okay, 3 cups of flour. I left as 3, but 9/8 teaspoons of salt. I wrote down a picture, showed a picture of 9/8. There we go. Get it to focus. 8/8 would be one whole plus one more eighth. So 1 and 1/8. Don't forget, you can think about like a quiz. For example, you could think if you got a 3 out of 2 on a little quiz, you got the whole thing right plus one more point. And if it's halves here, it needs to be halves here. If you got a 5 out of 4 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right plus one more point. If it's fourths here, it needs to be fourths here. And for 9/8, if you got a 9 out of 8 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right plus one more point. If it's eighths here, it needs to be eighths here. Let's take a look at the 3 on the bottom that don't have a picture. If you got a 4 out of 3 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right plus one more point. And remember, if it's thirds here, it needs to be thirds here. If you got an 11 out of 8, you got the whole thing right plus 3 more points, okay? And a 6 out of 4, you got the whole thing right plus 2 more points. If it's eighths here, it needs to be eighths here. If it's fourths here, it needs to be fourths here. Sometimes kids like to think about it this way as well. One whole is the same as 3 out of 3, and 3/3 plus one more third is 4/3. For the second one, this one whole represents 8/8, and 8/8 plus another 3/8. That gives us our 11/8. And for 1 and 2/4, this one whole is worth 4/4 plus another 2/4. There's our 6/4 that we started with. All right, I hope you're feeling good about improper fractions, and mixed numbers. All right, let's take a look at the second page at our chocolate crinkles. Okay, so here's the recipe for chocolate crinkle cookies. And for some of the ingredients that were more than one whole, I changed them to an improper fraction, and your job is to change it to a mixed number. So the same thing as the first one, but with no pictures. All right, for 5/4, you can think of a quiz. If you got a 5 out of 4 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right, plus one more point. If you got a 3 out of 2 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right, plus one more point. Okay, remember, if it's fourths here, it needs to be fourths here. If it's halves in the improper, it still needs to be halves in the mixed number. And finally, 5/3 cups of brown sugar. If you got a 5 out of 3 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right plus 2 more points. And of course, if it's thirds, it still needs to be thirds, okay? I want to remind you that you can also draw pictures. So for 5/4, you could draw fourths and shade in 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And hopefully by that picture, you can tell that that's the same as a big old 1 and 1/4. For 3 halves, you could draw a picture as well, splitting those circles into halves and shading 3 of them. So here's 1 half, 2 halves, 3 halves. And hopefully you can see by the picture that 3 halves is the same as a big old 1 and a half. For 5/3, I don't know if we've shown thirds in class yet. They sort of look like a peace sign. So I'm going to draw 5/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3. And hopefully by the picture, you can tell that 5/3 is the same as a big old 1 and 2/3. All right, let's take a look at the bottom. All right. Oh, are these a repeat from the first page? These used to be separate things. They are. Lucky for you. All right, here we go. 4/3 is the same as 1 and 1/3. I'll have to change these for next year. All right, 11/8 is the same as 1 and 3/8. 6/4 is the same as 1 and 2/4, just like the first page. All right. Moving on to the third page, please. Also some repeats I see at the very bottom. All right, chocolate coconut macarons. Okay, here we go. All the ingredients that were more than 1 whole, I changed to improper fractions, scratch, scratch, scratch. And your job is to change them back to a mixed number. Okay, so this one's maybe a little bit harder. 5 halves. If your brain is ever feeling a little bit dull, and you just can't quite figure out what to do, pictures are often very helpful. So let's draw 5 halves. There's 1 half, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves, 5 halves. And I can see that 5 halves is the same as a big old 1, a big old 2, and a half. So 5 halves is 2 and a half. All right, 9/8, we've done that a couple of times as well. So hopefully you're feeling good about that. If you got a 9 out of 8 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right, plus 1 bonus point. And remember, if it's halves, it still needs to be halves. If it's halves in the improper, or eighths in the improper, it's going to be eighths in the mixed number. Okay. 5/4 is the same as 1 and 1/4. 5/3 is the same as 1 and 2/3. Again, if you're feeling a little bit confused, sometimes a picture is all your brain needs to really see it. All right, so I'm going to draw 5/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3. And I can see that that's the same as a big old 1 and 2/3. Oh my goodness, I bet these first 3 are looking quite simple to you, but that's good. Sometimes repeating things helps things to stick in your brain really well. All right, if you got a 4 out of 3 on the quiz, you got the whole thing right, plus 1 extra bonus point. And remember, thirds. If you got an 11 out of 8 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right, plus 3 extra points, eighths. And if you got a 6 out of 4, you got the whole thing right, plus 2 bonus points, fourths and fourths. All right, here's some new ones. All right, if you got an 8 out of 5 on a quiz, you got the whole thing right, plus 3 extra bonus points. Okay, let's talk about that one really quick. I know that that 1 whole is the same thing as 5/5 plus those other 3/5. And you'll see that that gets us to the 8/5 that we started with. Okay, 4 out of 2. This is an interesting one. The answer is just a big old 2, okay? Because 4 divided by 2 is 2. So again, if you wanted to, maybe a picture might help kids on this one. So if you were to draw 4 halves, here's 1 half, 2 halves, 3 halves, 4 halves. And I can see that 4 halves is just the same as 2 whole circles. If you got a 4 out of 2 on a quiz, you got like twice as many points as the quiz allowed for. All right, a 17 out of 10. Wow, you must have brought Mrs. Judson cookies. How did you get a 17 out of 10? You got the whole thing right, plus 7 extra bonus points. So remember that 1 whole is the same thing as 10 tenths. And if you add in those other 7 tenths, that'll get us to that 17 tenths that we started with. All right, let's take a look at the back. On the back, you can use a real recipe. You also could totally just make one up as well. All right, so I'm going to write down a few of the ingredients for some chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so you can write down what kind of cookie recipe. And again, it can be a real one, but it also could be if you just want to make something up. The key is that you need 3 of the ingredients to be more than 1 whole. If your recipe doesn't have 3 ingredients that are more than 1 teaspoon or 1 cup, you could alter it just a little bit in order to show the math. All right, so I'm going to do cups of flour first, okay? And my mixed number is 2¼ cups of flour. Now, you do not have to copy what I'm doing. You should do your own. I'm just going to give you a quick example, okay? All right, I know that 1 whole would be 4/4, but it's not just 1 whole, it's 2 wholes. So that would actually be 4/4 plus another 4/4, that's 8/4, plus 1 more is going to be 9/4. Okay, so find some of the ingredients that call for more than 1 whole and change those to an improper fraction. Okay, there's a couple of other things, like it calls for 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of salt. It also calls for 1 teaspoon of vanilla, but I often put more vanilla in. So I'm going to say 1½ teaspoons of vanilla. So again, that is one of the ingredients that's more than 1 whole. So that's a good one to use for one of these top sections, because then you can make it into an improper fraction. 1½ is the same as 3/2. Okay, let's see. There's also 2 eggs. So I'm going to put that down here. And it calls for white sugar and brown sugar, but I think I'm going to combine it because it's only 3/4 cup of both. So I think I'm going to add it together, and I'm going to write 1½ cups of sugar. So see, I'm kind of altering it just a little bit, which I know is 3/2. Okay. Gosh, I think that's all the ingredients. Maybe, let's do 2 cups chocolate chips. All right, that is, I think, all the ingredients in my chocolate chip cookie recipe. And I didn't have another one, so it's okay if 1 or 2, especially if it's a really simple recipe, if 1 or 2 lines are blank. But again, your goal is to write down a recipe and pick 3 ingredients that are more than 1 teaspoon or more than 1 cup and change those into an improper fraction. All right? Okay, guys, I hope you had fun with this cookie packet, and I will see you in class. Where is it?